Welcome to the Twin Cities Business Show. Today we are talking to Mary Grove of Bread and Butter Ventures about how she went from the ground floor of Google to creating a venture capital firm that's creating the next wave of great companies in Minnesota and beyond. Welcome to the Twin Cities Business Show. We are here today with Mary Grove, the managing partner of Bread and Butter Ventures. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
Delighted to have you on. As a table setter, tell us a little bit about Bread and Butter Ventures and what it is that you do.
So, Bread and Butter Ventures, we're a seed stage venture firm based here in Minneapolis, investing nationally in companies across the spectrum of three core sectors. So, food tech, healthcare, enterprise SaaS. We talk about how we're, investing in companies that think about how we feed ourselves, how we care for one another, and what the future of work looks like from right here in Minnesota.
That's very exciting.
Thanks.
I want to jump in a little bit to kind of one of the things that made me really excited for our conversation when we talked about this before, and it's your innovation circle. And you talked a little bit about how you guys are playing this really interesting role, weaving together sort of the startup community and corporate community here. And I think one of the things that I've heard a bunch is, we've been this big company town forever, and it's made it kind of difficult to draw those lines. So tell us a little bit more about what you guys are doing with that and how you're kind of trying to play that role.
Sure. So I think about, what differentiates us as a firm being based here in Minnesota. And we talk about, our ambition is to build a tier one world-class venture capital firm right here in Minnesota that invests nationally, but to do that from here and not in spite of our location, but actually specifically because of our location. And, peeling back the layers on that, we have such an unbelievable advantage being based in Minnesota, looking at these sectors where these multi-trillion dollar global industries, I would argue, the food system, healthcare, there is literally no better place to build a company in those sectors than here. But the next best thing, if you're not here, is to partner with partners locally here who can help you accelerate and really break down that barrier between the titans of industry and the emerging tech in their vertical. So, one of the things we were thinking about the thesis of Bread and Butter was, could we be that permeable membrane, right? Could we knit together the biggest titans of industry globally who happen to be headquartered all here? It's no accident, right? And then invest broadly, leverage the know-how, leverage the access to biz dev, commercial opportunities, partnerships, deal flow. These companies, as we've learned, are really hungry to work with emerging tech, but there's been no natural conduit or easy way to do that so far.
That's great. So can you illustrate an example, pick one of the larger companies that you work with and maybe one of the companies that you've invested in and like illustrate a little bit about how that works on like a real practical level.
Sure. So we have, 19 enterprise partners that are all formally part of the Bread and Butter Innovation Circle, and a lot of names and folks that from Ecolab to Cargill, General Mills, Hormel, Mayo Clinic, Target, 3M, Securian, a whole host of really industry leading players who are all here. And how we work together, we convene a few events each year for that whole network of innovators that I mentioned of the 19 companies. But we also work bespoke one on one. So, some of them invest in our fund, but all of them help with on the front end of market insights of what are we seeing from I call it both top down innovation of the trends, the pain points these companies are seeing, but the bottoms up innovation too of at Bread and Butter. We're seeing 2,500 deals a year, top of funnel. We invest in, 6 to 10 new companies each year, but we can really aggregate themes across supply chain, healthcare, sustainable packaging, remote patient monitoring, climate, you name it, and help feed those insights back into industry as well. So, to give you an example, a really recent investment we made that we're super excited about is a Minnesota-based company in the healthcare space called Q Rounds.
Q round.
Q Rounds, and what they've built is an incredibly innovative communication platform where it both is a workflow automation tool to help physicians optimize the queue of patients when they do in hospital rounding. And it's also, importantly, an app that provides time transparency to families and to nurses too. So, if Mary's in the hospital, Charlie, you would be able to see, my round is at 10:15 a.m. You can RSVP to join in person or join virtually, and it will patch you in if you can't be there in person with real-time language support too. Right. And so what this does is provide an incredible amount of democratization to who has access to this type of to being at the bedside even. And so we're excited about the technology. It sounds, it's so ubiquitously needed, but it really hasn't existed in this inpatient setting before. And so that is through one of our partners, so Fairview Health System. We've worked together for a long time with, a number of, they're really leaning into to innovation there. And so we had actually met Dr. Michael Pitt, who's the founder and CEO of Q Rounds, a few years back when it was super early idea, earlier than Bread and Butter Invest, and had kept a little bit in touch. But really, it was Fairview who had been partnering as their foundational health system partner and had been telling us, referred the company back in to say, this is incredibly innovative. The results that we're seeing tangibly are moving the needle for patients, for families. And so we took another look and were blown away by what we saw. So we ended up leading Q Round Seed Round that just closed earlier this year. And it's a good example of just collaboration between industry and venture to help, in their case, actually pilot the technology and deploy it and learn. And now it's really poised to scale nationally.
Really. So this is what I think is so fascinating. Is that there are these large companies that are kind of bringing things to you guys. So is it more often that they'll bring things to you, or that you'll bring things to them, or is it kind of an even interchange?
It goes both ways for sure, for sure. And so a lot of both within our portfolio companies of sending opportunities to companies, but also, in both directions. And then sometimes we can convene one to many gatherings. So, for example, last week we held, earlier this month, just a fabulous event called the Future of Healthcare, where we brought 6 of our portfolio companies who were innovating, in areas ranging from maternal health to breast cancer to remote patient monitoring to AI data infrastructure, and they each had, quick format, present, Q&A, but the audience was a roundtable of 40 enterprise leaders, all based in Minnesota, largely healthcare, but also just broader innovation circle partners as well. But we had representation from almost every health system in Minnesota, several payer organizations, employer consultant, benefit consultants, and it was electric to see all of those players around the table having a group conversation about the future of healthcare. And there was a little bit of a healthy tension in the discussion around, well, what does a large enterprise need to be able to deploy? What are some of the barriers? Where in the early stage companies talking about, what are the barriers that we have to actually integrating with a large partner? And so bringing together both sides of the ecosystem is really one of our goals through the innovation circle, believing that a rising tide, lifts all boats, whether or not a company's in our portfolio, but it is a really powerful demonstration of this Minnesota home field advantage.
Yeah. What were some of the topics or themes that came up in that healthcare discussion? I'm really curious because you convened this really special group of people. Like, what were the things that surprised you, or that you feel like you learned from that?
I think thinking through what are some of the pain points that large healthcare organizations, so health systems, health plans, provider networks, what are some of the macro challenges that we're navigating in the current healthcare environment? One is absolutely the cost curve of healthcare from, the continued rising cost of care, lowered reimbursement rates is a huge macro theme that we're really challenged by right now, thinking about um, quality of care and how do you reach patients in all settings, including rural versus urban, right? So, how do you think about beyond just simple or telehealth, not to call it simple, but beyond telehealth today, how do we really reach patients in rural populations and rural settings? AI, the topic of the day, right? What are the applications of AI to healthcare? And I think that it is going to be and is already one of the most compelling, powerful opportunities of our lifetime. And it is also fraught with a lot more weighted responsibility when you're talking about patient care, people's lives at stake. And so, how do we go about navigating that from a pilot, from a test, from a proof point, from a deployment, where there's always human, not just human in the loop, but human at the center still? So, a lot of these themes were, topics of the conversation, and specifically these startups who are pretty scale now, just talking about some of the early learnings because it's only through these early stage collaborations that we really can have the data to take something nationally. So I'm a big believer that a lot of the innovation in these sectors is going to come from bottoms up, but is only going to succeed if it can scale through the incumbent infrastructure, if that makes sense.
And that's where the model comes from.
That is.
Yeah.
That is.
Um, Thinking a little bit about, these, a lot of these corporations have their own venture teams,
Mhm.
and then you guys are here kind of playing this role. What is that relationship like? Is it one that is collaborative? Is there a little bit of healthy tension? Like, what is that relationship like with some of those teams?
It's super collaborative because, in no case are we looking to replicate or replace their their venture efforts, it's really supplemental. And so if we think about some of our partners who have dedicated venture teams, 3M Ventures, for example, Blue Cross Blue Shield has an active venture arm. They have their mission, they have their mandate, so do we. And so it's not about it's about just sharing insight, sharing deal flow, sharing what we're learning, what they're seeing, what we're each seeing to improve. So I have absolutely found this to be such a collaborative ecosystem. And one of the things that we learned about the Innovation Circle work, which was a delightful surprise, I would say, we founded the Innovation Circle about 5 years ago and launched it with our third fund. We anticipated that Bread and Butter would work directly with each corporate partner, which is absolutely happening. But another byproduct we heard was these innovators wanting to connect with their peers,
Hmm.
their fellow corporations. And we loved hearing that. And so what we've done as a result is convene at least 3 events a year, private events specifically for the Innovation Circle around topics of high interest. So late last year, for example, we did an AI roundtable, which is, 40 leaders or so. And it's a private forum to talk openly about what are you seeing? What are you using? What are you excited about? What threats are coming down the pike? And really just have an open conversation. And so that cross pollination of talent within the innovation circle has been another really delightful piece of the work.
So we have to talk about AI. Um, it feels like it's transforming everything, all the ground under our feet right now. I heard recently from somebody that 95% of the local venture value was going into local venture dollars were going into AI or AI related companies. Um,
1%, 90?
95 was what they said. And,
Wow.
I think not maybe that's off by an order of magnitude. It also feels like there are some companies that are, they were software companies and now they're like, we're now an AI company.
Mm.
So, how are you guys thinking about what AI will do to society and how to even come up with investing in something that's changing so much month to month to month?
It is a fascinating time to be in technology, right? And in the 25-ish years that I've been in the field in tech, and I started my career at Google, spent 15 years there, all of these waves that we saw from, the mobile web revolution to cloud computing to quantum, now AI. I personally haven't experienced anything with as high velocity and as high ubiquity as we're experiencing right now. So it is an exciting moment, and there's a lot to be thoughtful about, and a lot to be measured about, and a lot to be bullish about too. So when we think about AI, we think absolutely we are in an AI bubble, and we are not at the peak yet. Is my personal take on it? Of we're in the middle of somewhere in the early innings here, early to mid innings, if you will.
So there's a bubble. The bubble's going to keep growing
I
from
think
here.
so. I
Yeah.
think we're seeing a lot of, this is shaking out across every industry that we invest in, across the venture field in general. And so, how are we approaching it as a firm, as a team at Bread and Butter? A few different layers. One, we're trying to stay as current, as literate, and as at the forefront as we can on a personal note too. And so every week, one new thing our team is doing now is we're taking on an AI challenge as a team each week. And so we're literally building or vibe coding or creating something individually, coming back and sharing, learning from it, brainstorming. And so that's been a really fun piece of getting your head wrapped around how would you utilize AI internally to run the firm, but also just as an individual of a side project. So that's one. Two is that we're working across the portfolio to help our companies have an AI strategy. Whether you are an AI native company or not in this current era, there needs to be a component of an AI strategy, even if it's to say we're not we're not leaning into AI.
Mhm.
And it comes up in every conversation, every partnership conversation, every fundraising conversation. It also is coming up in the respect of how do you utilize AI to make your operations more efficient, to do more with less in a capital constrained market still. So that's kind of lever number two. Lever three is in our actual investing work. So we are actively deploying right now out of our fourth fund. We have $80 million in assets under management in total, 85 portfolio companies. So we invest in AI companies, but AI is more of a horizontal layer, if you will. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're B2B investors investing in software, tech-enabled care delivery, tech-enabled services, where AI can be a pretty exciting avenue, if you will. So we feel bullish, but also, yes, we absolutely need to be thoughtful, um, be cognizant of the applications of this technology for society, right?
Yeah. What would you tell somebody who's entering the workforce right now about the places they should be looking and just trying to navigate all of the AI disruption that's coming?
I think it's important. It's always important to, follow your passion areas and study things that you love. And I also believe that there are some very practical, functional skills that really stand out in today's professional environment. And when we invest in early stage companies that are growing fast, I'd say two areas that are always incredibly hard and super competitive to hire in. One is product management. And so, less the specific engineering per se, but the product management layer of being responsible for helping, PM, so to speak, the entirety of a product from start to finish is one. And the other is sales. Sales people, especially in, enterprise SaaS salespeople, healthcare salespeople, these are very specific valued, high value roles who are often among the top compensated people in these fast growing companies. And pretty much people are learning on the job,
Mhm.
right? So if there's an opportunity to cut your teeth and get exposure to some of these practical skills, that's huge. And then I would say, because access to AI tools are so readily at the fingertips, lean into that, even if it feels uncomfortable at times or different. It's quite gratifying actually to see the output and how instant that is, and just to become familiar and fluent in it.
Okay, that's great. Very, very good, very practical advice.
Thanks.
Um, I want to dive in a little bit more to your background. We met when we were both living in San Francisco. You were
Long
working at
time.
Google, I know. And can you just walk through a little bit of kind of what you were doing at Google and how that led to bread and butter?
Yes, and it's so fun to be sitting together now in the Twin Cities
Hmm.
and have come from both great places. So my background, yes, I grew up in California. I was, my parents were both immigrants from Thailand, so I was very blessed to grow up in a scrappy immigrant entrepreneurship family where they both had backgrounds in healthcare as well, and they just really valued, because they had experienced such a firsthand version of the American dream. This thread of entrepreneurship and starting your own business or controlling your destiny was really ingrained in me from a young age. But I did. I went to college in the Bay Area. I went to Stanford, and serendipitously was in the backyard of tech at a very interesting time. So I did not intend to go to into tech, but on campus recruiting senior year, and I ended up getting an offer to join Google. And so I thought I would join for 1 year on my way to law school. That was my master plan. And
There's still time.
well, 14 years later, I was still there having the time of my life, and just chapter 1 was entirely Google. And it was 3 different roles, 3 different cities, so many learnings, but I worked on the IPO deal team as a legal assistant in 2004, which was a fascinating experience, even down to how the IPO unfolded. Just Google was such a contrarian company and democratizing access to so many things. And I fell deeply in love with the mission of the company and was fascinated by what was happening on the product and business side. And so I had an opportunity to join a small team called New Business Development, which was a catch all for everything non product and engineering at the time. So we partnered with product and engineering leadership to help with go to market for products, everything on the front end, before launch, and then after launch, how do we market and uh, get products into the hands of users through partnerships primarily. So did a lot of emerging market expansion work, and through that actually became really enamored by this idea that entrepreneurship as a platform for economic growth was an incredibly powerful lever. And so I ended up back in the headquarters in Mountain View in 2011, and our founders had said, we have so many organic efforts around the company involving startups. So what if we had a dedicated team with budget and headcount to experiment? Would you want to give it a go? And so I had the great privilege of helping build a team that is today called Google for Startups. But at the time, the mandate was, how do we figure out how to use Google's talent, our tech, and our capital to help invest in startup ecosystems broadly? And so through that work, we did everything from launch. I think we have 8 now, or Google has 8 physical campuses internationally that are community hubs for startup innovation and for startups that are essentially gifts to the community. We had a number of accelerator programs, looked at fund of funds, looked at a variety of different mechanisms. And I'm really just so grateful to have done that work. It gave me my deep love for early stage innovation and working with, really early stage companies. And two, it showed me that there's so much opportunity in emerging markets all over the world. And if you look at the US markets, it's markets like the Twin Cities and cities like ours that were eye opening. And so that was chapter one of my career. And I was, lucky to meet my husband, Steve, was at Google as well. And so that was chapter one. Our son and daughter were born in the Bay Area and they were one. And we were thinking about what does chapter two look like? And so we took a sharp right turn, took the life pilot experiment, moved to Minnesota, left Google, and that's where chapter two began, which has been venture capital. So still that same mission of how do we work with to help grow and build entrepreneurship ecosystems and companies, but from the venture side specifically. And so when I came to Minnesota, I thought it might be, best to show up with a resource in hand first. And so I ended up taking a role joining Steve Case's team. Steve's the founder of AOL and an incredible entrepreneur and visionary. And Steve had this whole concept that he championed called Rise of the Rest, which is rise of the rest of the cities across the US, outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston, that still today get 75% of venture capital dollars go to those three places. And so Steve had launched a venture firm, Revolution, which had a few different funds. And so the newly formed seed fund was dedicated to investing in markets just like ours here in Minnesota. So I joined as an investment partner to help incubate that and spent 2 years there, working there from Minnesota, though. And so that was my introduction to coming to this market.
That's great. And then take me through launching Bread and Butter. And one, for people out there, I feel like it'd be really helpful to know, where does the money for something like that come from? Who do you talk to? Like, how do you start something like this?
It's such a fun uh, labor to embark upon, right? And it's actually very much like being a startup. It's like starting a startup, but it's the startup itself is the venture capital firm. And so we have a team of four. We're all here locally in the Twin Cities. We just love what we get to do. And the origin story of Bread and Butter starts with my business partner and fellow general partner, Brett Broll. And so Brett, super deep expert in food tech and ag tech, a longtime entrepreneur. And he had founded and led the Techstars Farm to Fork food tech program here, ran it for 6 years. But on the side, he had a small solo GP fund that he launched on his own and primarily looking at food tech because that's his expertise. And so Brett was halfway through his second fund in that journey when he was thinking about what was next. And I was at Revolution at Rise of the Rest thinking about, wow, I love this work and I love this thesis and I love this stage. And I also am really starting to fall in love with my new home of Minnesota. And coming from my corporate background that I shared at Google, it was with the corporate partners here, became really obsessed with this thesis that I think there's an opportunity to leverage this corporate backbone from an early stage venture perspective, which nobody's doing right now at scale. And we posit that the corporations want to work with emerging tech if the connective tissue existed. So Brett and I got to talking and brainstorming and ultimately decided to partner up and team up together. And so this was early 2020 where we rebranded the firm to be called Bread and Butter Ventures. We kept the food tech thesis that Brett leads that vertical. We added healthcare as a second vertical, which I lead. And we added enterprise SaaS as our third vertical, which we both invest in. So we're a 2 GP fund. And then we had Stephanie Rich, who's our partner, running platform or thinking about all the scaled ways that we support companies after we invest. Formally joined as well. So we've been together. And then Anna Wilgos is our wonderful operations manager, joined us about a year and a half ago. And so as a team of four, it really is a small team with really global ambition and to do it from right here at home. To answer your question on how does the firm get created? So we go out and raise pools of capital. So a new fund, each fund is a 10-year fund life. So we are raising capital from outside investors or limited partners, LPs, as we call them. And includes a mix of institutional investors, so corporations, foundations, a fund of funds, family offices, as well as individuals who are investing. So you have this pool of capital. So our current fund is 40 million that we're investing out of today. And that's a 10-year commitment on our part to invest, help manage the companies, and steward that capital for 10 years. We hope that in that 10-year time frame, and these companies are super early when we invest, they will grow, they will scale, and we hope that they will have venture scale returns, which means that they will either be acquired or go public, and those returns, the capital will return back to LPs, will return the capital. But we end up raising a new fund roughly every 3 to 4 years. So you start to build fund on top of fund on top of fund. And so that is essentially the business model of venture capital is, we take a small management fee or standard management fee to run the firm. And then really it's about this long-term investment for a decade.
Yeah. What is a standard management fee?
Most standard in the industry structure is what's called a 220, which means a 2% management fee and then a 20% carried interest. And so what that means is, if you once you return 100% of capital to LPs, so someone puts in $100, let's say, right, $100 gets returned, and then every dollar on top of that, we return 80 cents to the LP, and the fund keeps 20.
Got it.
Mhm.
So what kind of return are most investors looking at or expecting when they're investing in something like Bread and Butter, one of these
Mhm.
funds? Or does it change fund to fund?
It's so we rely on industry benchmarks to see how is a certain what we call a vintage of fund. So fund vintage, much like a fine wine,
I was just gonna say it, so it sounds like wine.
it refers to what year were most of those investments made, or when did you begin deploying the bulk of that funds. And so, with our as an example, our third fund is a 2021 vintage. We say, which is when we closed the fund and we started deploying investments. And so then the data set gets compared with peer funds in that vintage because you take into account that the market looks probably very different then than it did 5 years before or 5 years later. And so, typically I mean, venture is such that you can have one incredibly outsized return, but every time you make an investment, you really hope that could this one investment literally return the entire fund.
Hmm.
So if we have a $40 million fund and we're investing $1 million into one company, do we think that one company has potential to return $40 million of capital? Mathematically, is the market large enough? Is our entry point right from a valuation perspective and how much we own? And so that's kind of the calculation there. So, you know, 4x cash on cash return, I would say is a good goal for a fund at this stage and size.
So I'm not gonna ask you to pick favorites, but if you had to guess which one of your portfolio companies do you think is right now most likely to be that standout success, or which is one of them that you think is more likely than others to be that standout success?
We have some early data points now already from some of the earlier funds. So some, shout out to Fund One company, Hungry in the food tech space, that they just announced a couple months ago that they've crossed the $100 million annual revenue run rate mark, and they've achieved sustained profitability. Super exciting. We've been invested there since the pre-seed. So there's some that just farther along from a time perspective that have
Hmm.
really made some phenomenal traction. I think another more recent one that's I would shout out a local Minnesota connection to is in the healthcare portfolio, a company called Delphina in the maternal health space. They've built an AI powered platform for maternal fetal monitoring to be able to predict complications of pregnancy and then
Wow.
provide work on care plan intervention plans. So they're really powering obstetric practices nationally. And I mention them because just phenomenal founding team, multi-founder team with such different and wonderfully complementary backgrounds, solid tech and AI, and then a lot of great market penetration. And specific to Minnesota, Delphina Care is now available in Minnesota. They're live with Mayo Clinic, and so just in terms of ones to watch that I'm really excited about. When you think about health equity and health outcomes, that so much of that disparity can be alleviated, or we can help solve it through technology, is just really powerful.
That's really exciting. Delphina, okay. Keep an eye on.
Keep an eye on Delphina.
So when thinking about the ecosystems that can create this flywheel of these things, and thinking about Silicon Valley's had all these companies over the years, all these exits, all this talent, and the exits of one company beget the create or the funding of other companies, right? And when you talk to people about the this space in Minnesota, there's this two things that I hear all the time. One, there are a bunch of smart people working on a bunch of really smart ideas. Two, there are all these big companies doing big stuff. But three, that we haven't had the number of exits or big, huge companies that grow out of the startup space that we need to really create this sustained ecosystem, and that we could really use like a couple big hits. So what do you think it would take to get there? And Do you have a different view or a different thesis on kind of where we're at right now, or what we need to get to where we need to go?
I feel bullish, very bullish on the opportunities here, and certainly, we're all in on the strategy that is place based too. A few thoughts there. One, the density of Fortune 500 and large enterprises that we have here, they started somewhere, right?
Hmm.
They started in their infancy as well. Yes, some moved to town, but we have a track record of building and growing and attracting talent and building global scale in Minnesota. So we shouldn't forget or be too humble about the fact that the blueprint has been written here already. One, two, we have a true advantage in we have a lot of the assets that any thriving ecosystem needs right here at home already. And that includes the density of talent of all types, given our enterprise backbone, right? So many people we meet here. I moved here for a job 25 years ago. I plan to stay for 1 year, 3 years, right? We've all heard that talk track, but that has provided us with this blessing of just immense talent across different types of functions, different backgrounds. And I found that talent does, go from startup to big company, back to startup to big company of a lot of people who are part of that flywheel. We have universities, research institutions, we have large health systems. From an ingredients perspective, we have so much. And Q rounds that I mentioned earlier is a great example of, came out of some research at the University of Minnesota as well. So we have the flywheel here, a lot to feel positive about. We also have, although this is a where I think the biggest opportunity lies, capital. When we lack access to capital, a lot of ecosystems that I've worked in, right, one of the biggest challenges is access to venture capital. I would argue that in Minnesota, the venture ecosystem is still very nascent, still early days. There are a lot of great funds here doing good work who continue to grow, raise successive funds. That's very necessary and important. But on a relative basis, we are far, you know, behind still in the density of venture dollars available in our state. The good news is there is capital available in Minnesota. It's not necessarily deployed to venture today. And so one of my biggest areas of optimism and hope is that some of this wealth that exists in the state more broadly in different asset classes, if we could allocate even a small fraction of that into venture as an asset class, it would transform things overnight. And venture is a riskier asset class for sure, but it has a place in a portfolio and it can have very outsized returns when it hits. And so that would be my dream, right? Is to shift around a little bit of the resource allocation in our state. And the good news is we have it already versus states that are still needing to really build from zero. And so that's my rallying cry, if you
Yeah.
will. And for companies too, to feel emboldened that I know I talk with a lot of founders and there's frustration that there aren't enough VCs or there aren't enough VC dollars in our state. And I agree. But also remember, you have access to investors everywhere. And so the idea that you should build it here, we would love for you to stay here and grow here, but raise money from anywhere. And I feel the same as a fund manager as we go out to market to raise our funds. More than half, about it's almost about 50-50 of our investor capital in our fund being Minnesota versus from elsewhere. And that's by design a little bit too.
Yeah. So that resource allocation thing is very interesting. Um, where is that money sitting now? And just make the pitch for why it should be going, why that money should be put into venture.
So a lot of it today sits in real estate, sits in private equity, later stage private equity, or uh, cash, maybe even right, just not invested.
Yeah.
The argument I would make is we could be and are already we're at the epicenter of many global industries today, but there's pressure. There's an imperative to create the next Fortune 500 company. It's been a while since one was created here. And I would make the argument that, and having worked in Silicon Valley most of my career, Minnesota's special. And my dream is, we aren't focused on building the next Silicon Valley here. We're focused on building Minnesota here. And if we are to lean into our strengths, again, to talk about the sectors that where I spend most time in healthcare and food, there are over 1,000 and maybe many more healthcare companies headquartered here, right? Ranging from the largest from United Healthcare down to the two-person startup that we're looking at investing in, everything in between. This is Medical Alley for a reason. This is the leading hub for healthcare technology. Food, there is literally no better ecosystem from a density perspective, whether you're talking about supply chain on farm, dairy distribution. We have so much at our fingertips, but we need to invest in creating that flywheel. And I have seen it. I've seen it time and time again. When a company builds here, they do well, they end up moving. They often end up moving to the coast. And we can support that here at home. And I sincerely believe that we have an extraordinary advantage, and we're betting our firm thesis on it. And I'm excited about the progress because it is starting to click in terms of that corporate moat competitive advantage, if you will, coming into play.
That's very exciting. Um, what are Give me a couple other of your portfolio companies you're excited about that are based here that you think people should maybe haven't heard of but should start paying attention to, or maybe they've heard of and they should be paying more attention to them.
For sure. So one is called Gudea, Gudea, and we refer to them as the storm tracker for the internet. They're able to analyze, large amounts of information and do a lot of deep analysis on and to be able to predict threats or online narratives for really any entity. But they have recently been featured in The Guardian, Rolling Stones, New York Times for work tied to global brands and figures including Taylor Swift, for example, being able to predict beyond just run of the mill sentiment analysis. And it's super powerful technology. They have this year already to date doubled revenue, work with numerous Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies. So that's one to watch in terms of the applicability of that technology to any industry, from healthcare to public sector to any Fortune 500 brand, a small company. I've used it to look at data directly. And so it's good is one to watch.
They are not. You're not the first person to bring them up to me. So it's
Really?
they're something's happening there.
Something's happening there.
Yeah.
Something's happening.
Anybody else who's a little earlier on that you think might be a pretty interesting story in the next couple of years?
So Champion is another local company. Jeff Reekers, the CEO and founder, is based here. And think of them as, how do you leverage, they're in the customer marketing space. So how do you leverage your current champions to help with, breaking open the doors on revenue growth? And so they've got some pretty compelling products that are super intuitive to understand. So for example, B2B software selling into a company in this era of AI, trust is actually the most paramount thing. So if you're thinking about buying a new software, what are some of the things you want to know? One, I want to talk to a customer reference from a current customer. So Champion enables you to actually easily do that, bring in a customer for a reference call, and then do direct revenue attribution, right? How much is that customer driving of
Wow.
new revenue growth? If somebody changes jobs, let's say you have a champion who's your sales leader at your customer organization, they change jobs. Job tracker feature follows them to the next company, helps you unlock that relationship too. And so definitely one to watch in terms of phenomenal founding team, three founders, Gianna, Courtney, and Jeff. We think just bring a triple threat of amazing talent. So keep an eye on Champion too.
Great. So somebody's sitting out there, they've got an idea, they want to start a company, and one day they want to be able to go to Mary Grove and get a check to invest. What do you tell them about things they need to be thinking about when they're thinking about taking the leap and starting a company that can one day succeed and grow?
I think a few things there. One is what's the founder product fit, if you will, of why this problem, and is this something that you want to be on a 10-year journey building? And usually the answer is yes, right? I have a personal connection to the problem that maybe millions or hundreds of millions of other people also experience. And so that enduring connection of why is that fit, why is that mission is one. Second, I think closely about what type of business are you building and what's the best way to capitalize that business, because venture capital backing is one very specific but one of many ways to capitalize a business. And it's for a company that wants to be on that 10-year path that I shared, with an exit is the end goal, right? And so there are many businesses for whom that isn't necessary. Non-dilutive funding is available. Better to own more of your company if you don't need to give up equity. So thinking about the actual capitalization structure behind the business. And then three is building with co-founders, with team that you just deeply believe in, and to go the distance. Team is the number one thing I would say that we look for when we invest in companies at this early seed stage. It is by far the biggest weight in our decision. And so thinking through, what are your strengths as a leader? What are complementary strengths that you want to bring on board? And, is this the team that you want to be in the trenches with day in and day out? But I would also encourage that even if you're before the stage where you're looking for venture capital funding and you want to learn more about it, a few resources that we as a bread and butter team would love to offer and have made available. One is open office hours. So every member of our team does open office hours every week. So companies anywhere can sign up for a quick 20-minute virtual coffee chat. And it could be to share a specific company that's live now, brainstorm ideas, look through a financial model. We've had high school students ask us for help thinking through college decisions. I'm not joking. And we love hearing from people. So at our breadandbutterventures.com, our website, on the community page, there's a link to book office hours with each of us specifically. And then two, we do have a number of online resources from our blog series that we try to post a more practical guide at least once a month. My partner Brett has an awesome YouTube channel called Brett's Brain, where he does, for those who enjoy a video format, quick 3 to 4 minute clips on what's a liquidation preference, what to look for in a term sheet. And so we invite you to get involved. And one thing I'd love to say is that we really believe in, while we invest nationally, we want to be the front door to our state and region. So even if we are not a fit for a company because of sector or stage, let's say, we still want to be helpful if we can. And so please consider us a resource for this community because we have so much promise, so much potential, and we're excited.
That's great. I would be remiss if I didn't thank you because my wife's a Californian. When we were thinking about moving here, you guys had a bunch of conversations and you were very helpful in just helping to navigate it, talk through, what it's like to live here and work here. So, thank you.
Would she thank me too?
I think she would. Ashley, it's up to you. What do you tell somebody who's thinking about, they're thinking about taking the leap, they're thinking about moving here and building a career, they're a little apprehensive, maybe they don't know anybody. What do you say to somebody in that position?
So I just hit 8 years in Minnesota. So it really feels, I can't believe it's the better part of a decade. But I say, Minnesota welcomes you. We take the leap. And I have been so delighted by what I have found here, both professionally and personally. I'd say professionally, the diversity of thought and sectors and careers here, even on a human level, the close friends I've made come from all different professional backgrounds versus a more homogenous environment like Silicon Valley, right, where we're all working in tech. And so I think that there's that. There's also very much a pay it forward mentality here, and there's a close knitness where if you have coffee with somebody, they're likely to help open the door and introduce you to two or three more people who would again do the same. And so that is a really special piece of the fabric here. So I would say embrace it. The adage is true. There's not, what is it? There's no bad weather, just bad clothes. If yours truly, a San Diego native originally, can make it work. But it is special, and it feels like while we have achieved so much as an ecosystem, and speaking specifically on the tech entrepreneurship front, we're really part of that next wave. And I do feel like we are one click away from being able to unlock something tremendous, and the resources are here. So I hope they join us.
Let's make it happen. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you as well to Gabe Noah, to Keely Doyle, to Ali Alt, Connor O'Neill, and Mike Novak for all your work behind the scenes. We will see you next time.